Jason, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It is a real honor and privilege, and I'm super excited to talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart.
Oh, it's going to be so good. And you wrote a book. What's the title of your book?
The book is called To Hell I Ride, and that's a play on words of the town Telluride. Back in the 1850s when miners were going there, the town had a reputation of being so boisterous and rough, and people would scream, "To hell you ride," when anybody decided they were going to go there and try and find their riches. So there's a little bit of wordplay. It's sometimes confusing. Not everybody looks at the cover and just gets it, but there is a picture of a mountain on the book. So I'm trying to help people understand the reference, and there's even something in the prologue about it. But there is a tie in there.
Can I tell you why I love the title so much? Because there is this defiance among people that drink too much, do too many drugs, let's call it alcoholism or drug addiction, that they're sort of like, I know it's bad for me. I'm doing it anyway. So to hell I ride. So as soon as I saw that, I was like,
yeah. I mean, that is actually, it plays perfectly because
right.
I think that when it comes to, drinking or doing drugs or, touching a hot stove, if you know it's bad for you and you continue to do it, you're really kind of just saying, yeah, to hell with you. And to hell I ride.
To hell I ride. I love it. So good. We'll talk about your book a little bit and some other things. When we were talking before about doing the podcast, you talked about something that has really been kind of up for me in my circle of friends, which is men's vulnerability. So we'll kind of cover, I'm going to ask you a little bit about that, like what your perspective is on it. And I know that you got sober without going through 12 steps. I know your dad kind of ruined, may have ruined the program for
He
you, but
wasn't the greatest, I guess, endorser, so to speak. He
right,
wasn't
right.
the
That's a
one to
very
follow.
common experience I hear, though.
I
So
can
I,
imagine it's
yeah,
got to be something so personal, and
yeah,
it's no different if you go to a restaurant or on a vacation. Maybe you're on a cruise and you're paired with like the worst family ever. You know, you're never going to want to go on a cruise again. You just can't
exactly.
take that risk. It's like,
Yeah.
okay,
People definitely make associations when you have a negative experience. You look for what are the associations. So it's like that negative bias that you're looking for what is the problem, how to solve it. So I don't have to do that again. So
yeah,
it makes
yeah.
sense
So
that
so for whatever reasons, it's been a more of a DIY process for
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah. Well, I have lots of questions about that. I'm old school recovery, and I was kind of like, there kind of was only one way to do it. No, that's not true. I guess you could white knuckle it. That didn't work for me. I needed a little bit of help. So I went the 12-step route, but there weren't as many options and as much information as there is today. So, but I'm sort of rethinking, a lot of things about recovery. So I'm always interested to hear how that has played out for you. But first, I like to do what I refer to as the lightning round, which actually turns out to be very slow, but
All right.
we want to play.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so did you have a favorite book that helped you a lot when you first got sober?
I would say Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. Um,
Oh, yeah.
you know, because I think it just covers everything, where
Yeah.
it gets you centered. It really kind of helps you not focus on the past or teach you that it's just an illusion and to not look in the future because all you're doing in the future looking is you're rewarding your ego to think that you can outwit everything when in fact all you really have is the next breath coming in. And
Mm.
I think there's probably maybe 100 people on earth that ever get to that full enlightenment state, and they're secluded on a mountain and they're breathing all day and listening to chimes. And so in the real
Yeah.
world, it's not even a possibility. But I think if you just try to sharpen your groove every morning by at least trying to be intentional, it really
Yeah.
helps. And that's a book that I just keep on my bedside table, have a lot of passages underlined. And the other one is a collection. It's a box set of Gary Larson's The Far Side, his complete works. And I grew up reading those in the paper. They're so funny, just brilliant. But looking through life through his prism and just seeing the the absurdity and the comic relief in almost any situation, it really helps, to flip through if I'm going to like another dinner party, that's going to last 4 hours, and every couple's going to get in a fight or something. So I can just kind of go, oh, what would Gary Larson see here? And then quietly eat my meal and
WWGD. Okay, I love that. That's funny. I like how you incorporate a little sense of humor, right? I think we take ourselves a little too seriously sometimes.
Yeah, very important.
Yeah, very important. Did you read Eckhart Tolle's follow-up book, The A New Earth?
I did not read The New Earth. I know there's another one
There's another one on that top of that one.
I believe so. There's maybe it was more of the article thing, but I have not.
I've heard of it. Yeah, that one's a really good one too.
I've heard him be interviewed about it, but I think it's kind of the same thing repackaged in a different way. Maybe.
Yeah. A New Earth was really profound to me, and you would think that, oh, he has nothing left to say, but holy moly, I found that to be super. I wish I could think of what the takeaway was, but yeah, that was really good too. Do you have a go-to mantra or quote that you live by?
I believe that when a man realizes he has no limits, he has no limits. And that one's kind of grounding me and keeps me humble. I don't know if I came up with it or I heard it somewhere, but it always just rings true to me, and it really takes your ego out of the equation of a lot of things. And it kind of leads to that vulnerability that you and I were discussing earlier. We can put it back in. And the one that I kind of came up with in my own daily journal is, God saved me for this. And what I love about it is that you can ask it as a question. And so whenever I find myself in a situation that I'm not enjoying, or somewhere that I don't feel comfortable, or I'm doing things that I don't feel I should be doing, it's God saved me for this, and it just kind of gives me the permission to go, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I want to go over here and do this. So it's kind of an active one that I put to play probably, I don't know, multiple times per day. Even if you're waiting on the line at Starbucks and the person in front of you is taking forever as if they're doing their taxes, right there at the counter, you can kind of laugh. It's like, oh my God, you saved me for this? So anyway, it's just a way to keep light.
Yeah, that's actually pretty funny. I remember when I was in my last year of tech sales, last couple of years of tech sales, I kept saying, God did not put me on this planet to sell software.
Tough gig.
Yeah, but it led me, it kind of, this, I had, it kind of connects you with like, what is my inner purpose really? And how can I express that? So,
yeah, coming from a recovering salesperson himself, I will never forget, whatever the end of the quarter, end of the month, whatever quota system you're on. And, you come to realize that the power, the happiness that you depend on, the money is fully dependent on somebody that you may have never even met, that's just going to sign a contract and, e-fax it in. And the amount of pressure and the weight and all that is insane. I mean, the rewards are great, but there is a price to be paid.
Yeah, I didn't like my future being dependent on somebody else.
Yeah,
not right. Fun.
Especially that way.
Not fun. Do you have a regular self-care routine that supports your recovery?
I try.
We all try.
Yeah. It's like there's intermittent fasting and there's intermittent like working out, like I know it's good for me to go run in the morning, but maybe I don't do it every morning. But I know sugar is, the worst. And maybe 1 or 2 days a week, I skip on that. So I really have found that when I at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the month, when you get a new journal and a calendar and you start writing all these things down that I'm going to do this and I'm going to biohack this and that, I find that it's not a natural flow for me.
Yeah.
It's too rigid. So I just do my best to, eat kind of healthy, work out a lot, and not a lot for me. And then that's pretty much it.
Do you have a spiritual practice? Like, Prayer,
Um,
meditation,
I,
journaling.
I do. It's a big part of my life. We're we're churchgoers, and of course, have a great, strong sense of community around that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because my upbringing, church was uh, different. This is another thing that my dear old dad taught me. It was almost like something that couldn't be trusted, and so I started feeling really, I don't know, not uncomfortable, but just there was a sense of this. What does it matter if we get up every Sunday, put on a little sport coat, and go sing hymns? Does this really move the needle? And then as soon as we leave, before we get to lunch, my parents are fighting again. So what did we really learn? And I like to think that the relation I have with my maker is just more personal, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of one-on-one time, and that's usually happening in the morning and in the evening at night, and then we'll share as a family and talk about it all the time. There's really so that I guess that's it really. But
Yeah, I
there's
mean
not.
that's a really significant, having that place of connection and fellowship and sort of getting refreshed. That's a really important practice. Um, what's one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
Let's see, that's a great one. I think that it would have been helpful to know that everything will be different in the most profound way, because when you've spent the last 30 years, whether it's a celebration, you're drinking, whether you're sad, you're drinking, whether you're not doing anything, you're drinking. And it was rather shocking at first to realize, oh my gosh, it's 5 o'clock. What am I going to do for the next 5 or 6 hours? And that didn't take too long to figure out. And had I known how great those hours would become, maybe I would have stopped drinking much sooner. Because when you have all of your facilities and your connections are nice and sharp to everything, you're just living I guess, a more, I don't know, feels a lot more fulfilling life, to me personally. And I know it resonates with my family.
Absolutely. That's a great lead into my last question, which is always, what do you do for fun? How did you fill those 5 or 6 hours in the evening?
Well, there were two failed attempts at sobriety, before this one. And I think it was just the cliche. It's like, oh my gosh, I have all this energy. I better train for a marathon. And so I would just literally, start running, and that filled the time, but that's not sustainable, physically or mentally, I think. And so it took a while, but I started realizing, like, you know, with the power of now and all that, it's like, where you are is where it's at. Wherever you hang your coat and hat, I think that's a Driving and Crying song, or Kevin Kinning.
That's funny.
And if you really believe that, then you can start living it. And I am not even exaggerating when I say, if I had friends call me and said, hey, we've got a private jet, we're coming down, we're picking you up, we're going to Vegas, golf, whatever. And the option was to go to Target with my daughter Ruby and look at new conditioners, I'd be like, I'm good, guys. I'm about to go to Target with my daughter. This is fun.
Mm.
And it takes a while to get there. But once you do, um, a man has no limits.
A man has no limits. I love that. I think somebody recently reached out to me, and he was like, it was this guy, a friend of mine that's not in the program. And he was like, oh, I work with this guy who's young and he's newly sober, but he's hitting that place in his life where he's bored. And I was like, wow, that really is something important to be addressed, because it's like your brain, your dopamine reward system in your brain is all healing. So life might initially seem kind of flat, but it's so important to really dig in and start experimenting with things that bring you joy. And if it's going to Target with your daughter and spending time with her, I mean, those are the things that have heart and meaning. Those are, you're making memories with your daughter. What's better than that?
Yeah, and my hair's never looked better.
And your hair looks fabulous. Oh my God. That's
No,
so good.
I think that's so important, the boredom
Yeah.
part, because even as recently as every week I'll find myself sometimes it's the weekend, maybe my wife went out of town with friends and kids are off and everywhere. And it's like Saturday night, I'm sitting there with my dog and, phone's not ringing. And then, you're like, I'm never like, oh, I know this would go away if I just had a bottle of wine. It's just either just be bored or get up and go do something. Go clean the yard or, clean your golf clubs or do something, because
Yeah.
you can fill that minute with something and you will, the time will pass and then you'll find yourself actually enjoying yourself. And I had a really interesting conversation with a person I'm close with years ago. And he said the same thing. He's like, I can't believe you quit drinking. I'm never going to do it because I would just get so bored. And I said, well, I mean, were you bored as a kid? Like,
Right.
what'd you do for fun when you were a child? Oh, I hunted, I
Oh, what a
fished,
great
I did
question.
this. And I'm like, well, when did that not become fun? Or when did drinking have to be a part of that to be fun? And so, yeah, if you start just thinking about things a little differently, I think we all, I started fairly young. I realized in your biography, you were a very early entry starter. And so, I mean,
How old were you when you started drinking?
like first sip of a Pabst Blue Ribbon was like fourth grade. But I would say, the first
That's
time
how it starts, is with a little sip.
just a little, it's okay. And
Yeah.
the can's so cool. But, I would say, the first time I was like totally wasted, seventh grade. And then when it just became a part of my life, in eighth grade, we were, the school dance, it was like, who's bringing the bottle, and then it
Yeah.
just became a part of life, so even, into adulthood, it was like vacations were built around drinking,
Yeah.
whether it was a long lunch or this and that. And so it is the challenge to, take that toy away.
Yeah.
And God bless the people that can just, do it, and moderate and all that stuff. But it became something, it became not a friend of mine,
Right.
after a certain time.
I hear a lot of people, and this was true for me too, is that when I stopped drinking, it was like losing my best friend or losing a love, right? It's such an
Absolutely.
integral. Yeah. And did you have that experience as well?
Yeah. And I loved drinking. I mean,
Felt that to my core. So did
uh,
I.
I mean, it scratched the itch, that
Yeah.
nothing else could. And I
Yeah.
tried pretty much everything. And,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did your experience include drugs as well?
um, yeah, but I wasn't, I mean, that was more like early days, the
Oh
high
yeah, when
school,
you're
college
younger.
stuff.
Yeah.
There
A
was,
little weed.
yeah, and I love that it's legal, and I'm like the whole economics, the politics of like the legalization. I am so for it. I think it's
Yeah.
great. I believe in, the healing powers and all this stuff, but it just never did it for me.
Right.
I know they have strains now that remove paranoia, but I just remember, I thought I was like having fun at like a Rolling Stones concert, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm never getting into college, and
Paranoia.
it just made me feel, my inner voice was always a challenge, but
Oh yeah.
anytime I got high, it, it just became like evil.
Oh
So
yeah.
that wasn't free.
No, thank you.
Booze, on the other hand, was like, "Oh, come on in here for a hug, yeah, young boy." And, so, yeah, giving that up was, it wasn't hard, like, to not do it. I was just never tempted again. But, I mean, there have been some long walks where I'm like, "Oh, that time," just the warmth of a big Cabernet flooding your bloodstream.
Right.
It's a real thing.
No, I know. Yeah. What happened to you that you decided you wanted to quit drinking? Was it like an ongoing? You mentioned two failed attempts, and I'm doing using air quotes on a podcast
Yeah,
because I feel
well,
like the
the
attempts are an
first
important part.
no, I think I love, chicken scratches or air quotes, very cool.
Chicken scratches.
I'd always known, that this was a problem. I mean, even in college, even in high, you just know.
You felt
And
like it was a problem, like it was
oh
wrong or something?
yeah, that I was just drinking way too much. But I was also looking at it like, yeah, who cares? I'm gonna
To hell I
live my
ride.
life, and Sinatra did it. If it's good enough for him. And the first time, it was like a 9-month thing, and to be honest, transparent and vulnerable. I went on a trip with friends to Montana. Fabulous time, but the whole time I just got obliterated. On this cabin, and didn't do any of the hiking. And I came back, and I was like, got on the scale and was just obese. I was like, oh my god. So that's what made me. I got to quit drinking. Like, not the best reason, for purposes of vanity. And that whole 9 months, there was maybe like a month. I was like, oh, this is great. My head's clear. Life is fun. But I just kind of knew that this wasn't going to last. And then there was another time. It was more of like, it was just to take the attention away, during the holidays, getting too sloppy. And I was like, okay, I'll quit. But the last time was in Telluride. It was, followed by a road trip that we drove 17 hours. And about a week before that, I was discussing with a psychiatrist all these fantasies of suicide that I was having,
Oh,
and
wow.
like it was just, we were talking about the weather, and she kind of looked at me, you know, very perplexed, and it was like, you really need to stop drinking. And there was something in the way she said it that I don't think anybody had ever, I guess, from a medical point of view. And she seemed, so just like, are you an idiot? I mean, what are you doing? And so I was just manic and ruminating about this on my entire drive, which is, the content of the book is what I was thinking about.
Oh,
And, by the time I got to Telluride, I think I was just so exhausted and, probably in that place where like an Eckhart Tolle wants you to get, where you're just, where people that do 3-hour yoga sessions get, where you're just empty. And
right.
and when I was there, walking the streets after a day of skiing, I remembered a little wine bar on the west side of town. I was like, it's been a week. I could. And then as I was walking, I just kind of started like feeling very vulnerable and weak, and
Oh,
not
yeah.
wanting to go back down this path. And I really just started hearing this voice saying, you don't have to do this anymore.
Oh,
You don't have to do this anymore. And these are tears of joy because it was so great. But it really, like, from that moment, I stood there. I kind of was lost. I didn't even know where I was. And I just have not had the any temptation. I mean, under any imaginable scenario, I can't even imagine myself
oh,
having a drink, and I've gone through all the tests, business travel alone in New York City. I could have
yeah.
gone to 21 and had martinis all day and nobody would know the difference. But it was just, it almost makes me nauseous, just thinking about it. And,
Yeah.
that was I guess the moment, where the clarity, where
Mhm.
I just felt, the hand of God come down, and, kind of even the voice of my father estranged. It was just one of those things where you're beside yourself. And I didn't even tell anybody about it for uh maybe 6 months. I mean, people knew. They're like, wow, this is really weird. Jason's not drinking. And I just never felt comfortable. Just one, most people just don't want to hear it. And I've certainly been on the receiving end of many stories of like, well, God spoke to me on a mountain, and this is what He said, and you're kind of rolling your eyes, and that's really what compelled me to write the book, is that I didn't know how to, really tell this story, and I think it could be helpful. And
Mm.
I think storytelling. whether it's whatever your hobby is, it's, or what you do or what you love to do, whether it's climbing mountains, golf, yoga, whatever, you want to read books and talk to people that do it and see the benefits or do it a different way. And I remember 6 months or so, and my wife and her at dinner, and I was like, hey, kind of want to tell you the story, and I explained it, and she just, I mean, it was almost like she was waiting for the dessert menu. Maybe it was because she heard a boy cry wolf so many times, but I
Mm.
took it as, I'm just not really telling this right. I haven't really expressed this clearly because I think it's awesome, and I want to share it. And so then that began the process of writing the book, just to hand off to anybody that would need it, that is looking for, hope.
Hope, yeah. Jason, that is a beautiful story. And I'm so glad that you were able to. I was going to ask you about that process of writing the book, and I mean, what a beautiful reason to share that experience. Like you had like I mean, from this side, I don't mean to interpret your experience, but it looked like, oh my God, you had this spiritual experience. And we hear people tell their stories of spiritual experiences, but when it happens to you, that's like personal evidence, right? And I love that the conclusion was that there was hope, and you haven't had a drink since, is that right?
That's correct.
And how
And
long ago was that?
it's been over 6 years. It was spring break. It's in the
Wow.
March. So, I used to have like little app counter and days, and I think it's important to look back at your kind of milestone. But
Yeah.
it just became one of those things that, it wasn't a way for me to measure, I guess, myself. Like, oh yeah, I look at it as, the I'm 6 years old. That's kind of when I
Yeah.
was born, and I get to look. I'm still like a kid looking at life in a completely different light.
Yeah.
And finding joy, and getting my hands dirty in the dirt. Digging holes to plant trees, and really just being completely focused on that. And it's easy to do because I think what a lot of people do when they stop, not only with the boredom, that's a big hurdle, but then
Yeah.
the I get not the abandonment of their old
Mm.
friends, and
Mm.
that it didn't trigger anything. There was, I was kind of like, wow. But the way I started looking at it is, I think we all enter, a social contract.
Yeah.
And for the most part, every social contract I entered, it had its, list of agreements and this and that, and it was signed with a pen dipped in, whiskey. And I was the one that broke the contract. So I'm in breach. So um, nobody in my life should feel anything other than they're happy to keep living their normal lives. I'm the one that broke the contract, and so I'm the one that's trying to figure out my new life, etc. And it really just kind of allowed me to not think and imagine that people are like completely abandoning me, because they're probably not. It's just like
They're
everything,
just living their
just
lives.
living their lives.
They just happen to surround their lives with alcohol. So,
Yeah,
and they know.
and
You know what? That's a really interesting point, is the abandonment of friends, like how your circle changes once you get into recovery. And it sounds like you just found a way to make peace with that by taking responsibility.
yeah, I think that just owning that, and I think that that we all have, like, a natural, I guess, it's just called a circle. And when I removed the drinking from my life, it not only gave me all my superpowers back, my time, but also it's like, why are you here? Oh, you have these three beautiful kids, and
Yeah.
why don't you just immerse yourself? And then, because when you do, it's incredible. You feel great. It's the most natural thing. So why continue using this synthetic thing and act like it's fun to, pass out at a dinner party on a Thursday night when you can, go to Target with your daughter and look for
Yeah.
hair conditioner. And I think these things are all, of course they're available to everybody, anybody, but the challenge is taking the time to come to that conclusion. And the book that you and I were briefly talking about, what happened to you,
Oh yeah.
Oprah,
What a great question.
and the guy, he made such a great point, and that is, being able to look back at your life it's not an opportunity, but it's a benefit that most people just don't have. You know,
Mhm.
like, and certainly taking the time out of your life to like write an article or a book about it. My God, I mean, it's almost like a socioeconomic divider. Like, that's how important it is to be able to go back and look at the game tape of your life and come to reasonable conclusions. And that's, focusing on the trauma points, even the highs and the lows. And I would like to think that what I did with my book was doing that for everybody. Gen
Yeah.
X, here's your story. Because the
Yeah.
feedback that I've gotten, after we did the soft launch, and the most meaningful feedback and very consistent, is that nobody's really said, "Oh my gosh, this is such an incredible drinking book." It's an incredible story, and
Yeah.
I see myself in so many of these places, and you're able to just kind of, I don't know, live your own life, or look at your own life through the lens of this narrative that's, it's upbeat, kind of funny. I mean, there's some dark stuff in there, but it's available. It's something that isn't, oh my God, I woke up and, there were 3 dead bodies on the floor. And that was the other part of motivating me to write it, is that I certainly haven't read every book from somebody that recovered from drinking, but the ones that I were or did, it was hard to relate to. There's, hey, look, Ozzy Osbourne, he's snorting ants, like
Right.
with Motley Crue, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, but I don't see
That's cool.
myself. I can't like
Can't
relate,
relate.
can't relate, and
Eating snort
so
ants? That's weird.
yeah, does it work? So anyhow, I don't want to say it's like the every man's or every woman's story, but it just weaves in and out of, starting from kindergarten, and kind of touches on almost every year of my life. And it's a trip down memory lane for a lot of folks. And
Yeah.
that was, I guess, the gift that I wanted to provide,
Yeah. And I mean, talk to me a little bit about like the cathartic experience of writing a book. It had to be so, I mean, because they say one of the tools of recovery is journaling, right? And sharing your story of transformation. It's like an act of service, it's an act of connection. What was that? What was that day like for you when you put the pen down and you're like, this is complete and I'm going to give my gift to the world?
It was incredibly uh, gratifying, but kind of scary. The When I moved to Los Angeles after college, I was chasing, screenwriter's gold, the next Pulp Fiction, da 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 da. And, I was writing most of the day, but at screenplay, it's like stage direction, this, 3 drafts, send, hope for the best. But when you're writing something, I guess creative writing and so interpersonal, I mean, it was a big challenge.
Mm.
And I mean, some of these chapters, going back to, moments in second grade, where bringing up the memories of, like the first time I saw my dad really, kind of drunk and hint of violence, I'd always remembered that, but ruminating on it for hours, days while I'm rewriting it. I mean, there would be days at the end of, writing or editing, where I would just be completely exhausted emotionally, physically. But it took a lot of work to get it right. And that was the thing, is that, I can't put this out there unless it is right. If it's
Mm.
doesn't feel right or sound right, or make me really feel something, then I'm not going to just put it out there for the sake of putting it out there. And
Right.
the initial, reviews have confirmed that I did that, not from
Yeah.
like the New York Times yet, but uh,
Yet.
yeah,
No, that's great. I've been talking, I'm writing myself right now, and I've been talking to a lot of, authors and coaches, writing coaches and things like that. It just sounds like such an amazing experience. And I really appreciate you, coming on and sharing about all that other stuff. Before I turn you loose, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about men's vulnerability, which seems to be a topic that's up in my circle. And I feel like the mainstream thoughts or feelings about how a man is supposed to feel is changing. And everybody is in the process of sort of updating their thinking. When you got sober and started feeling everything better, how did you come to terms with trying to be honest and in touch with your feelings in this new sort of um, mainstream thought of it's okay to be vulnerable?
yeah. I really look towards, Hollywood for a lot of things. I love movies, grew up on movies. And, uh, so I looked at people like, Rob Lowe, like a Jason Bateman, Robert Downey Jr., the people that quit. And, oh, guess what? They're freaking movie stars. So, I was raised, I think most men were raised to fake it till you make it. I'm drinking, I'm tough, I'm a big rugged
Right.
Texan, I don't need these thoughts. And what I it really came to me once, somebody was like, well, gosh, I mean, aren't you worried sharing all these stories? And I thought to myself, like, who the coolest dude ever is Johnny Cash. And who's more vulnerable than Johnny Cash? I mean, if he didn't write songs based on his trauma, he would have been, a banjo plucking, birthday clown, in Nashville if he was worried about like what the upper crust at Nashville Country Club is going to think of these stories. And so, that freed me to really just move forward on that. And I think, a lot of maybe in California it's progressing a little faster, but I think when men think of vulnerability, they're like, oh yeah, it's like men in the jungle pounding drums and chanting and doing a lead dance. And I think where it's different now is that you can actually, once you finally see the benefits of just, even if you're just being honest with yourself, at first, and I think for people that are troubled by alcohol, that honesty, the most vulnerable thing you can ever do is go, you know what, I have a problem with alcohol. It has kicked my butt. I'm
Mm.
dead. It's the ones that are,
Honesty. Yeah.
yeah. So, and that's kind of the, the man who realizes his limits has no limits. It opens the door to just learning new things and, having a co-pilot in that. Boy, I can't overemphasize that enough. And I think it's very hard to find that co-pilot, like man to man.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you would meet somebody, whether you've known them your entire life or you met them on an airplane, that you're gonna open up and talk about
Right.
that, because you're still playing this, game of like, I don't know, whatever peacocks do, where they confront each other, and then
Yeah.
you end up just telling the same old BS, and then that leads you to just doing the same old BS stuff that you do
Right.
in your life. So
Yeah. I feel like that's one of the biggest benefits of like some kind of program. It doesn't have to be 12 step necessarily, but like I'm sure you find it at church or, just having community and fellowship that you can find that co-pilot and be, I don't know if you realize that was something you said was so profound to me, which was the honesty and the sharing opens the door to learning. I was like, wow, that is the truth right there. That was really
yeah,
good. Yeah,
and
just being honest, like not being afraid to be honest and being worrying about that image management kind of stuff.
and the other thing, I think curiosity is like the new wonder drug.
Yeah, that's good.
It's incredible if you just kind of, or aphrodisiac or whatever, but if you remain curious, you
Mm,
can't help but be vulnerable, because you're going to finally get to that thing that you don't understand. And if you're really curious, like genuinely
yeah.
excitedly curious, you're going to raise your hand and ask a question. You're going to figure out how to overcome this obstacle, whether it's, learning how to ride a horse or how to refinance your financial empire. But, I think the second the person feels, hey, I know it all, and regrettably, most of us have did that in their 20s. Like, I can't be taught anything. I finished college and blah, blah, blah. Your growth pattern just stops, at
Yeah.
least on an interpersonal level.
Yeah. Yeah. No, remain curious. I mean, that is really you're just breaking off the spiritual chunks like it's no big deal.
We'll record part 2 tomorrow.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I feel like I have so much more to ask you. I know that your wife is a therapist and she's doing some really cool work that I personally around psychedelics and things. Like the thing about remaining curious is that we're always getting new information, and it does update our thinking. Like, don't be afraid to change your mind if you have new information that is helpful or relevant. Or I mean, there's just always, I feel like, you said something about like biohacking, or it's like this recovery hacking thing, sobriety hacking thing that we're doing. We do have to remain curious and question our thinking. Is this really true? The questions are so important. Like you mentioned that book that we were discussing, what happened to you, that's different than what's wrong with you.
Right.
Right. So anyway,
But-
I love these ideas that are really rooted in curiosity.
and they do talk about it, asking that question when you see somebody, losing their mind, at the gas
Yeah.
pump or something, and they can't
What
get out of the
happened to you?
car, and you're just like, what is wrong with that jerk? To
Yeah.
just, and it's bizarre how you change your thinking if you can do that regularly, or
Simple
just,
rephrase. Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, I don't know, I'm not like a porcupine, but there are times where I'm like walking through a store and I'm just like, oh, like there's just,
Too peoply.
yeah, there's just people are close and they're everywhere and they're talking. And, it's helpful for me to walk in and just like, I wonder what's wrong with that person. Why are they wearing a fanny pack and talking on a cell phone? As if the person on the receiving end is in Antarctica, like,
Right.
what happened to them? And then you can
Yeah.
almost start making up your own story.
Well, that's a question rooted in compassion.
I think so. Maybe
Yeah.
it's of a way to hack compassion.
Compassion.
By using,
Compassion hacking.
yeah, there we go. I
I
think we just
love it.
literally figured out something.
Coin a new term. Yes. Well, Jason, obviously we have lots of ground to cover, but thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your wisdom. I learned a lot today, which is something I love to do.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that. And maybe we'll have to do a round 2 at some point. But I really thank you for writing your book, To Hell I Ride. I just love the title and sharing your story. And thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable and honest today. I know that you're going to touch people's hearts and give hope. And really that's what we're trying to do, right?
Well, I thank you. And, you already have, taken the brave step, created the platform. I think the podcast is great. I always like to think, it's like, if you hear a really good one, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm hearing something that I probably shouldn't be hearing. Like you're listening to two people talk, like at a coffee shop, or maybe they're sitting
Right.
up at the first class. So I hope we're able to provide your audience with some meaningful content and ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Well, listen, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy your day and I look forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely.